Hey everybody, it's Dr. Parker. I am here to discuss your discussion, which as always was really good. I'm a little bit scratchy in my throat. Everybody's got a little cold this week, so I think I'll be fine, but I'll try to keep it a little bit short to keep my voice from just being awful. But you did have a lot to say, and I thought it was really good. So I'm going to start here at Callie's response. And the first question is about the parson, and right, this is um, the you said the only true religious figure that we see, and that word "true" I think is the one that we're going for. He's the one that's authentic. He's the one that is doing what he's doing for the right reasons. I talked a little bit in the introduction about the idea of the knight as being one of Chaucer's idealized characters, as the perfect kind of version of whatever he is. A lot of people talk about four characters: the knight, the clerk, the plowman, and the parson. And I don't know if you picked up on it, but the parson and the plowman are brothers. I mean, not just brothers in Christ, but actual blood brothers. And they represent sort of the ideal versions of their estates. Um, Right, and you do a good job of looking at the other religious, and they're pretty bad. Uh, that, and I think you make a good point that the prioress did not become a nun because her heart's only desire was to do so. The monk, the prioress and the monk could have had, at least at one time, probably had some sincere spiritual feeling, but the friar doesn't seem to have ever had it at all. But uses it merely as a way to get what he wants in the world. But going back to the parson, you point out, as a lot of people did, he's genuinely interested in his flock. I mean, he's the only one that we hear about who's interested in ministering at all in any kind of traditional sense. That he doesn't need much materially, and in fact, as someone else pointed out later, he actually sacrifices his own wage, which would be really very little, in order to help his parishioners out. And I think the quote that you've got here, uh, he taught, and afterwards he wrought. In other words, he walked the walk. Not only did he walk the walk and talk the talk, but he walked the walk first, before he talked the talk, so that his people. I think there's a quote in there that says something to the effect that, if gold rust, what will iron do? And the preacher is the priest is the gold standard. And so if he doesn't do right, how could he possibly expect his people in his flock to do right? So, yeah, he's very much held up. And I think it's really important that the parson's in there so that we see that this is not just Chaucer rejecting religion, or really even rejecting the church, but rather pointing out the abuses within the church. But then he presents us with this good example of what should be going on in the church. The next one, I asked you to look at the squire and the pardoner. The squire is a big contrast with his father, which is right. Maybe he'll be like his father someday. But yeah, the parallels. The pardoner thinks that he is handsome and fashionable. Um, the squire actually is handsome and fashionable, and the pardoner just thinks he is. Um, there is a level of honor in the description of the squire. You say, he does, yeah, he's a servant of courtly love, whereas the pardoner is a pretender. And I think, depending on how you want to read the sexuality of the pardoner, if you think in Chaucer's world, he might think of homosexuality as a perverse version of love, and there is a way of reading the pardoner as a perverse version of the squire. He has yellow hair, but instead of being, curly and full, it's greasy and ugly. Um, Instead of having a good singing voice, he has a little goat-like singing voice. So there's a way in that the pardoner is almost the squire in kind of a funhouse mirror, where all of the things in the squire that are healthy and would be considered to be healthy and normal are sort of taken and made worse in the pardoner somehow. Um, Yeah, you picked out the clerk to talk about it. I'm glad you did because he is definitely an ideal character in his way. He is at Oxford. Um, he's got yeah, he's skinny. His horse is skinny, and I think that I mean, I don't think he's abusing his horse, but I think that we're supposed to get kind of a little bit of physical comedy here that people look like their pets or whatever. Um, yeah, he would rather have his books than nice clothes. It said the quote in there is something to the effect of he would rather have 20 books than all of these other things. I don't think he has 20 books. 20 books would make you a famous, wealthy book collector. Books were so expensive. I think the key is he wishes he did. He wishes he had 20 books. He would rather have that than almost anything in the world. But even if he has a few books, that's pretty remarkable because he's living more or less on student loans and ramen noodles. So um, you said you don't remember his tale. His tale is when I don't even remember if we're reading it, and I don't have my syllabus in front of me. The let's look here because I want it now. I want to remember whether we're reading it, so I know whether to talk very much about it. But it's the patient Griselda story. Is the story of a very very long suffering wife. Yeah, we're going to read it the week of April 13th to 17th. So I won't tell you too much about it, but I think you'll be interested in the story and whether or not you do think it's a reflection of the clerk, because it's something that in Chaucer's time would be very orthodox, and in our time is kind of slightly frightening and repulsive. So I'll be interested to see what you think of that. Let's see. So we were talking about the clerk. And yeah, this thing here, this quote you have, sounding in moral virtue was his speech, and gladly would he learn and gladly teach. And that's right. I mean, he's a student, but he's a true student. He's not sort of like a wants to talk too much and tell you all about literary theory, whether you want to hear it or not. He only speaks when he's got something to say. But this quote here at the end, gladly would he learn and gladly teach, that's often used as kind of an epigraph at retirement dinners for professors or whatever, that this is supposed to be what the ideal scholar is, that they love to learn and love to teach, and everything else is kind of incidental to them. Chaucer narrator, you have said that the Chaucer narrator is similar to the one from the Dream poems, uh, doe-eyed. Yeah, don't confuse him with the host, because he's not like the host. In fact, the host is the one who tells him that his tale is not worth a turd. So they're definitely not the same person. Um, but I do think you're onto something here with this. Chaucer has presented the situation as it is and is allowing us to learn a bit. I think one of the reasons that Chaucer takes such a naive approach to describing his characters is that he wants to leave it to us to judge them, that we're present. So even when he talks about, say, the monk, and he says, "Oh, that monk was so handsome, and he was such a good monk," he gives us enough information that we can say, "Ah, poor little Chaucer, you don't know what we know, and you don't realize his shortcomings as a monk." So I think that one reason that he's maintaining this sort of fairly, optimistic outlook as a narrator is so that he doesn't tell us what to think about the characters. Rather, we establish on our own what we think. And again, I think the partner is maybe the exception to this, but he's the only one. Even the summoner, he talks about how the summoner tells such great jokes and things like that. So let's look at comments. Julie, of course, agrees with you. And you've added this point here that not only is he not materialistic, the parson, but he is also not a respecter of person, as you put it, which is actually pretty apt. That he's not the richest old lady in his parish. He's not going to be any easier on her than the poor family that never is able to contribute anything. And not only is he's not just nice, he's not just always sweet and kind, but if someone needs a comeuppance, he'll deliver that as well. If they need some moral instruction, and it doesn't matter whether this person is of high or low estate. And I'm glad you pointed that out. um, yeah, the squire and the partner of the squire is a player. hate the game, not the player. And it could be blamed on you. The partner is a con man. So yeah, if there's anything that's inauthentic about the squire that's part of a con game, it's probably just his talk to women. Whereas other than that, he seems like he's going to have some, he's got good fundamentals. Whereas the partner is just he everything about him is kind of a con, which I think is right. Um, yeah, I want to look at your comment here about Chaucer the narrator, to tell you the condition of each of them. So as it seemed to me, um, yeah, that word condition is interesting in that context. The condition can mean that's what they look like, their what they're wearing, but also condition their social condition. Their how much money do they seem to have? How happy do they seem to be? I don't know. It could mean a lot of things, and and then you've written a little further down, which I take to mean he's telling us, the readers, about these characters as they appear to him. Yeah, seem, he uses the word seem, as it seemed to me. So he gives himself a little out by saying, well, I'm going to tell you what it seemed to me like they were. But what seems to be one thing to me might be wrong, or it might seem to be a different thing to you. So I think that's a good point. Susanna loves the parson, and if you knew Susanna, you would understand that seems very natural. And we all love the parson. Um, and I like the second sentence, or the third sentence you got here. I think it's notable. Chaucer only mentions following teaching about Christ with his character. Right, he doesn't seem to be so concerned with the church or the rules of the church or the hierarchy of the church. Rather, he's Christ-centered. And if you want to think about this as being Chaucer's consciousness of the beginnings of some of the movements that would eventually lead to the Reformation, I think there's maybe a little bit of that when we say that Chaucer had friends who were Lollards, who they weren't anti-Catholic, but they were maybe moving towards an idea that there should be less church between the believer and God. There should be fewer layers that you had to sort of work your way through. So I think that is apt. I think that's good. Number two, the squire is a playboy. I think I've given the squire a bad name now. But yeah, that he's a true playboy. He's the real thing, as opposed to a wannabe. That the partner is, maybe in some ways even copying someone like the squire. Yeah, do we want to pity the parson? I mean, the partner. That's a good question. He does seem pathetic, and I think when we get to the partner's tale, even more so, the prologue and tale, you'll have to ask yourself that: is he deserving of pity? Is he wanting pity? The partner, does Chaucer want our pity for the partner? All of which I think are legitimate questions and things that that we'll inquire about a little bit more when we get to his tale. Another person who picks the clerk as an interesting character. I like this, that y'all can't decide if he's ridiculous or honorable, because I think that's legit. I think there's a sense in which he is so committed that it is a little ridiculous, but I still think that Chaucer admires that. That he's so. Oh my gosh, you all had the friend in college who was such a bookworm that you almost couldn't believe it. Really, you spent all weekend, reading that assignment for class or whatever. But in a way that it's weirdly admirable, even if it's weird. So I think he maybe is a little bit of both. Yeah, I don't think there's anything too sinister going on with the horse. I think it's just a skinny core. I mean, I agree. He probably doesn't spend a lot of money on oats and apples for the horse, but I think it's more, we're supposed to see a physical resemblance because the horse is in some ways an extension. I think you could go through the characters and when it does talk about their mounts, I think there's probably a lot to be said. It says the knight has a good horse. I know that, let's see, the prioress rides on a palfrey, which is kind of a lady's horse, which extends to her kind of aspirations to the nobility and things like that. So anyway, I think it's a skinny horse because it's a skinny guy, and neither one of them eat very much. Yeah, asking about the order that they're presented. The only thing I can say about the order is the knight is the logical first choice because he is the person who's got a title out of all this bunch, who has Sir in front of his name. Other than that, I don't know. He does seem to present them in groups. So you get the knight, the squire, and the yeoman. And even though the yeoman definitely would be ranked lower probably than, say, the prioress, I think we're looking at parties. But so we have the knight and then the prioress, I guess, makes some sense. But after that, I think they're pretty much thrown together. And I think there's a little bit of intentionality in this confusion in that Chaucer's living in this new time with this new class, the middle class, and doesn't quite know what to do with people. Where do people rank? It's a little bit of a dislocating feeling, I think, for citizens of that world. They don't quite know how they're supposed to rank everybody. Okay, so Sarah's response we have here. The parson is exemplary. Yeah, I think so. I think there's very little doubt about that. And you've summed up the other ones nicely too. The prioress is concerned with petty issues, so it's not so much that she's thinking on evil, that she's trying to do something willfully evil or wrong, but rather her priorities seem to be on small things and not the important things. The monk is a hypocrite, yes. The friar is pretty bad, and the parson, rights all of those wrongs. He's definitely got his mind in the right place and his heart. The squire and the partner are both effeminate men. Excuse me, I had to take a sip of coffee there. Yeah, I mean, certainly we read them as effeminate, and the partner is effeminate, I think, in anybody's book. The squire, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he is definitely a ladies' man. Whether we want to read this as effeminate or not, I don't know. I mean, if we saw, one of our students now, and he had very expensive clothes and a, flashy watch, and had his hair done just in a certain particular way, and I don't know if we would read him as effeminate, even if those things were sort of colorful and well coiffed and stuff like that. So I don't know, but certainly, I mean, yeah, he reads a little effeminate to us. Um, Certainly, yeah, the squire seems to be a little bit proud of himself, to be someone who is meant to be humble. I think you're right about that. Um, but right, there's no questioning the sexuality of the squire. I think that he's all about ladies, and the partner, on the other hand, is a little bit more problematic. The shipman, yeah, we don't really talk about the shipman very much. The shipman's tale is a fablio. It's one of the sort of dirty joke stories. It involves a lusty young wife and a wicked monk and an old man, and the things that fablio tend to involve. I think, yeah, actually it fits him because I think, sailors have dirty mouths, so I think it is the kind of story he would tell. Um, yeah, what motive? I mean, motive for any of these people is kind of problematic. Everybody is on the trip, but maybe for different reasons. And it's supposed to be a religious motivation. It's probably a recreational one, but beyond that, I don't know. Um, Chaucer is the ignorant, sort of friendly companion. Those are the best kinds of companions sometimes. He doesn't talk about himself very much. There is when we get to I mean, we don't read them, but when you get to the part where he talks, I think the host says he's like a little doll. He's like a little puppet for a woman to hold in her arms. So I think he's supposed to be a little chubby, small, short guy, and that's what we'll get of him. Um, there's several places in Chaucer's writings where he sort of self-deprecates about his weight and his height and things like that. And I like that you're describing him as sort of being childlike, because I think that's right. I think he looks at them with these sort of wide open, assuming the best kind of eyes, and then we're the ones who are supposed to bring the grown up part to that transaction. Yeah, so I thought those were good. Um, yeah, if someone is selling indulgences, I expect them to look greasy and gross. That's in the job description of indulgence seller. Um, And you mentioned here, Callie, that Chaucer, the writer, chooses to let the description of the person represent their qualities of character. Yeah, that's very often true. I think I've mentioned that a little bit with the priorist, but you'll see it with the miller, you'll see it with the partner. It's with a lot of the characters that their outside represents their inside. Um, yeah, number three, the shipman is a little bit doesn't have his sea legs, as it were, once he's on a horse. Um, let's see. Yeah, Becca mentions the shipman. Yeah, I don't think you probably read his story in 12th grade English unless you had a really brave and probably slightly inappropriate teacher. Um, Sea Dog, the Canterbury Tales needs a pirate story. I don't think we're quite to pirates. Yeah, well, yeah, pre-golden age of pirates. I mean, obviously there were probably people on the sea who robbed other people on the sea, so I guess that makes them pirates. Let's back here to Julie's comments. Yeah, the parson is the one man, and yeah, and I like how you point out the narrator considers him a good man of religion, and of course the narrator's always a little bit unreliable because he calls other people nice things that they probably don't deserve. But in this case, yeah, he's a good man. The word parson, the is the same root as the word person. They're not really different in Old English, but so your parson in your church was your person. That was the person who led the church and represented the church. That's your human there in your church. So he's a good man of religion. He's poor. But despite that, he gives for on the sake of others. And you've pointed out the same thing, that he gives this example that first he does things, then he talks about them. He walks the walk first. Um, Number two, the squire and the partner feel they're both fashionable. They like to be merry. They like to sing. They're into their hair. They're into their clothes. Um, and you say the difference is the squire is out for women while the partner is out to manipulate other people. And that's true. I didn't really think about it. I don't know if the partner is cultivating his look for that reason, or if he's cultivating his look out of some sort of uh, misguided sense of style. I will say that when we get to his tale, he talks about how he's a traveling preacher and he's pretty good at it, and he does sound a lot like a TV preacher or something. And if you think about some of the hair that you can see on some of those guys, maybe maybe he is trying to cultivate something that the little old ladies like and will give money for. The innkeeper, Harry Bailey, yeah, he is an interesting guy, and like I said, he's probably based on a real person, Harry Bailey, and you point out he claims this is the best group he's ever seen, but I bet he says that to everybody, and I bet you're right. That this is the way that he gets to be, sort of out of town and doing this. I kind of, I don't know who he's leaving the bar with. I get his wife or his assistant or something, but yeah. Number four, yeah, Chaucer says, "My wit is short. I'm not too smart." There are a lot of Chaucer again. He does that a lot. He sort of says, "Well, I'm not very bright, so I can't describe the whole thing to you." And we probably think that he is actually pretty bright. Callie's comments on Julie are very similar to mine. Although your experience of the host was a little bit different. That the host was trying to entertain his guests, playing it up. Yeah, I thought I would like to read Yelp reviews for the Tabard. I actually went on Yelp to see if there was one, and I thought about making one up, but I didn't think that was probably completely a good idea. And then I forgot about it until just now. So, Susanna, everybody seems to be in agreement about the parson. I like, Susanna, that you bring up the country and town dichotomy, because that survives to this day. There's still sort of a stereotype of the good, pure-hearted country people versus the sort of corrupting influence of the town. New York City and all that kind of thing. And of course, it would be nice if that were true. But if you look at, you want to look at teen pregnancy rates or whatever, there's as much bad stuff going on out in the country as there is anywhere else. But we have this sort of thing, this sort of, and I tend to think of it as an American thing, where we think of the heartland as being the place of goodness, and the coastal cities as being the dens of iniquity. But yeah, I think that you're right. The parson is not a city dweller. The parson is out in the country. And I think part of that is to help us understand that his flock was poor and they were spread over a wide area and things like that. But yeah, he's away from all this politicking in the diocese here, and I think that you might be right. Maybe this is a little nod to that. The age difference, I don't know how old the partner is. I really couldn't tell you. I mean, he's not got children, I'm pretty sure, and of course, that doesn't mean anything. Um, I don't know. That's a good thing. Yeah, I think he's probably older than 20. Um, I think so. But yeah, but I think what you're getting at is the squire maybe is going to grow out of this, and the partner is not. And I do think you're right about that. I don't think that the squire's going to be fine, and the partner's not going to ever be fine. Is Chaucer being humble, or is this a rhetorical device, or what it is probably is humility being used as a rhetorical device, which is something Chaucer did, but he takes it from from Cicero and people from way back when. Um, yeah, C.S. Lewis had read a lot of Chaucer before he wrote that, so yeah, I think that's probably right. And let me remember where I am. I can't believe have I. Yes, okay, that's what we just did. I'm sorry. Everybody can. I'm showing my age and rapidly approaching senility. So on to Becca's. The prioress is like Paris Hilton in a nun's habit. Yes, and they have the same kinds of dogs, probably, it looks like. Um, yes, the parson is the one who is said to be generous, dedicated, a hard worker, a teacher, not scornful of sinners, and he is poor. Poor in goods, but rich in spirit. He seems to be the only person who is really holy, at least who's attached to the church. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think everybody's completely right about that aspect of it. The partner and the squire are both handsome. I don't know. I don't know if I think the squire. I mean, the squire's handsome. I don't know if I think the partner's handsome. He does have a smooth face, but it sort of says he was smooth as if he would never be able to shave. So I think his smooth face has more to do with a lack of testosterone, as opposed to having nice skin or whatever. Sorry, I didn't want to stop and start the recording just for that. Um, so, yeah, so the pretty boys, maybe. I mean, the squire is definitely a pretty boy. I don't know how pretty. I think the partner thinks he's very pretty. Um, it says the squire is said to be all about singing and flirting and poetry. But he does. It does say he can sit a horse well. He can joust. He can ride. He can fight. So he actually does have some of these masculine, manly things going on. If you want to put him that way. Lusty meaning lusty, but lusty also meaning just kind of high spirited, lust for life, not necessarily just a sexual kind of lust. But yeah, the partner's reason for being more effeminate may be implied, and certainly, yes, he is different from the squire. The nun, yeah, the nun and the priest or priests. Why was she mentioned? I mean, there is a nun's tale, a second nun's tale, and it's a saint's life. I think it's the life of Saint Cecilia. I can't remember right now. And the nun's priest has a tale. The nun's priest tale we're actually going to read. That's the tale of Chanticleer, which is one of the better known ones. And a lot of people have talked about why did the nun's priest get such an important tale, considering that he's not described. And there's a lot of there's a lot of argument about that. When the nun's priest, the man, gets ready to tell his tale, the host comments that he is really good looking and really big and strong. So he's this big, handsome, muscular priest, which is interesting that we didn't hear that in the prologue. I do think the prioress is a diva, and I do think she needs to travel with an entourage. I think it's part of her acting out courtliness, even though she is not part of a court. I think it is an example of her acting like a princess would act, which is to say she needs her people around her. Chaucer seems like an okay guy as a narrator. He's observant without being judgmental. He's not blind to their faults, as you say, but he mostly has nice things to say. But he is good with detail, right? Because because he's having to be the one who describes people to us. So there's a little bit of artificiality in that Chaucer character, because someone who is as dopey as he is in some respects, I think would not be as observant of detail as Chaucer, the writer, is. Julie likes your diva reference, which I agree, and Sarah likes your squire reference, which I also agree with. Sarah is disgusted with the partner, which I think is you're supposed to be. I think you're doing exactly what Chaucer wants you to do. Okay, and Susanna's comments, we'll look at. The parson is rich in thought and deed and teaches the true gospel. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed this out. Skip down here to the prioress has this piece of jewelry. It's interesting. It's a rosary. It's a set of rosary beads she uses to say her prayers, but it has a crowned A, and it says "Love conquers all, amor vincit omnia," which right, it's ambiguous because it can mean Christ, the love of Christ conquers all, but it can also be a romance thing. So I think in the same way the prioress herself is an ambiguous religious / romantic figure, I think her jewelry has an ambiguity to it too. The monk is not so great, and the friar is probably the worst. And yes, they're all very different from the parson in those respects. They are both what we might consider effeminate, she says. Susanna says of the partner, the partner and the squire. And again, I think there's probably a little bit of disconnect in our definitions of what is masculine and feminine between then and now. But yeah, basically, I mean, he's certainly a failed attempt at being the squire, as you've said here, if at all. He's compared to a gelding or a mare, and he's got iffy allusions made to his sexuality. You like the clerk? Yeah, is Chaucer mocking students and lit lovers? I mean, maybe a tiny, tiny bit, but for the most part, he's not. And what you'll notice is we do have some other clerks in Fabliau's stories, especially in Miller's Tale. Nicholas is a student, and he is being made fun of, and he's being made fun of for what people made fun of students for back then, which was that he's actually lazy and doesn't like his lessons, but he is very sexually driven, and he uses his intelligence to trick this woman into sex and everything. So I think if you're going to make fun of a clerk in the Middle Ages, that's the way you go with it. Rather than what Chaucer's doing with the clerk in the prologue, which is to just paint him as being so serious that he is to the exclusion of all else, and which can border on the ridiculous, but I think to Chaucer is indicating a genuineness. Susanna, you are insistent that there must be an order to the presentation. I guess I don't know what it is though. Besides kind of starting with the knight and the prioress because of their rank, but after that, I think it kind of gets all thrown in together. And certainly, there's an order of the presentation artistically considered. I mean, he chose an order to maximize the literary effect of it, but I'm not sure that might be the main principle that he's using. Is now it's time for a funny figure, now it's time for a serious figure, or something to that effect. but I don't know. Does Chaucer have a crush on the prioress? Maybe. He thinks that she's awful pretty, for sure. Although he also notices that she is not undergrown, so he is observant, as we said. Which, I mean, maybe that's to his taste too. I don't know. I do like your last paragraph here too, where you say we can infer that Chaucer is a bit of an exaggerator. Yeah, you're right. I mean, everybody is the best and the greatest and the funniest and the prettiest and the whatever. And yeah, that seems like a little bit much. And this is, but people, my students all the time, she's the nicest friend ever. He's the most amazing piano player ever. And, no, he's not. I'm sure he's great. And by the lights of the Gardner Webb community, he might be the best, but he's probably not the best in the world. Um, but yeah, I think that's a product of youth, and now not that I think Chaucer, the narrator, is supposed to be young, but I think in his case it's a product of dopiness. But I like this. Is this a condensed version of a medieval town? It takes a village. Is this the village? Um, yeah, maybe. I mean, we don't have too many the vast majority of people would still be working the farm, and the only person we have here like that is the plowman. And we also don't have any high-ranking aristocrats. We have the knight, and then the prioress thinks she's one, but she's not. So it's certainly a microcosm of the middle class in a medieval town, but I don't think we can say it's a microcosm of the whole of the country. But just simply because of the lack of people of the very lowest class, which would be by far the most people. But I also don't think that they would necessarily add a lot of interest to the story. Sarah, Reverend Alden. We have our first Little House on the Prairie reference. I can tell my class is made up of women of a certain age. I'm just waiting for a Little Women reference and maybe a Silver Spoons one, and you'll be complete. Um, yes, we would all like to meet the parson. He seems like a nice guy. Um, Number two, I feel so. You're the second person who's, or unless I can't remember who said it first, but you do kind of feel sorry for the partner. I do. I think he is by the end of it all. I think he's supposed to be pathetic. He's the soul that's the most lost, and we don't know how much hope we hold out for his salvation. Um, yeah, the clerk buying books instead of food. We're all here because we're like that. You're in this class because you're like that. Think how many ramen noodles you could have bought with the money you spent on this class. Which I hope you feel like you're getting your money's worth. I'll send you all a pack of ramen noodles if you feel like you're not. And right, your point number four is really good here. Chaucer may be exaggerating, but it is incumbent on him to make us want to pay careful attention to these people. And so, yeah, I like that. I agree with that. That this is at least he thinks they're the best, and that in and of itself ought to be enough to make us kind of perk up our ears and listen. Susanna agrees with that. Becca agrees that Chaucer has got a crush on the prioress. That is an awful long description. I mean, if we counted up lines, and I also think she is one of the ones that Chaucer, the author, felt like he really wanted to make a point of because he lampoons other church characters like the monk and the friar. On the other hand, I think in some ways the prioress is the most insidious because that's not the kind of abuse that's going to be easy to find and single out and stomp out. I mean, it's the sin of being lukewarm, which that's what gets spit out. So I don't know. She does have a long description, but yeah, the narrator certainly is taken with her. He gazes upon her for a pretty good while, I'm guessing. Um, Chaucer maybe is a little bit smarter this time around, right? The other poems when he was narrating, he didn't have quite the task that he does here. He didn't have to quite give the amount of detail about individual people. He gave a lot of detail about places, but in terms of describing characters, I think this is pretty much more advanced. Okay, these were great. Thank you again, and some of these characters we'll run into when we talk about their tales. We're going to do the Knight's Tale next week, which is in the territory of some of the dream visions. It's one of the harder of the Canterbury Tales, so give yourself some time. But it's good. I think you'll like it, and I think that you'll find a real link between him, between the knight and the tale that he tells, for sure. So I hope you're keeping warm in this terrible weather, and I will speak with you again soon.